This is the strongest scam in World War II. Without doubt, the Allies used a non-existent ghost army and a carefully staged drama to deceive Hitler to transfer all its elite forces away from the real battlefield. They finally made a huge gamble to completely ring the death knell of the story begins in 1941. The Soviet-German War broke out. Hitler's million-strong army swept across the Soviet Union. Moscow was in danger. Stalin was anxious like a cat on a hot move. He urged the British and Americans to open a second battlefield in Western Europe to share some pressure for himself. However, this request related to the overall situation became a game between the two old fuzz and decay. Roosevelt of the United States was quite active, but this was not a pure friendship of allies. At that time, the US made a fortune from war and its national power. Roosevelt's plan was to send troops to Europe. Not only could it help the Soviets, but also insert American influence into Europe, to break the old pattern dominated by Britain and establish a new world with the US as the core. And Churchill of Britain, the leader of the old empire, had deeper thoughts. After World War II, the empire had declined and was dying. He needed the US's support, but also feared that the US would take it. So Churchill's plan was to let the Soviet Union enjoy on the Eastern Front, and both were hurt when the Soviet Union was about to defeat Germany, and Britain and the US would come out and reap the benefits. So, with Churchill's delays, the Allies first went to North Africa, and then to Italy, but refused to cross the English Channel. Stalin was so angry that he almost threw the table, and even threatened to make a unilateral peace with Germany. However, the change in the war could not wait for politicians' intrigues. By 1943, the Soviet Union in Stalingrad and Kursk successfully played and wiped out the German elite and began to push westward. Now it was Churchill's turn to be dumbfounded. If it continues, not to mention reap benefit, the whole of Europe might be liberated by the Soviet Union. By then, Britain and the US would not even have a place at the table. So at the Quebec Conference in August 1943, the US and Britain finally agreed, decided to carry out to cross the English Channel for a landing operation, codenamed Operation Overlord. A 2-year delayed life and death agreement was finally on the agenda. The first step in preparation was to choose the landing site. There were 3 options before the Allies: the peninsula of Constantine, Calais and Normandy. The peninsula was narrow, which was not conducive to it was first ruled out. The remaining Calais and Normandy became the focus of debate. Calais is closest to Britain, only 33 km, and the shortest crossing. It seemed to be the best choice. However, Hitler also thought so. He had already deployed 19 elite divisions in Calais and built solid fortifications, waiting for the Allies to fall into the trap. As for Normandy, the German army only deployed 10 divisions, and most of them were weak second-rate troops. And the fortifications were like tofu pudding. The only drawback was the distance from England, and the sea was risky. Finally, the Allied Supreme Commander Eisenhower made a decision: select Normandy. It was a surprise attack, aiming at the Germans' weakness. The location was chosen. The next step was the preparation work that was a miracle. For this landing, the Allies assembled nearly 3 million troops, more than 5,000 ships, and 13,000 planes in southern England. It became a huge arsenal to solve the problem of insufficient landing craft, even forcibly transferred some from the Pacific, a batch of them over. What's even crazier is, the Allies knew that Normandy had no large port. Supplies would be a big problem, so they boldly decided, since there was no port, they would build one themselves. They used 600,000 tons of concrete to prefabricate to huge, and were ready to be towed to Normandy after landing. They also laid for submarine oil pipelines from the UK to Normandy, which was an engineering miracle. Of course, among all preparations, the most crucial and critical, a strategic deception operation codenamed Operation Muster. Churchill said it well: truth is so precious in war that it needs a guard of lies to protect it. The Allies in the southeast of it created a group led by General Patton's 1st U.S. Army Group, using inflatable tanks, fake planes, fake barracks, and forged radio communications to create the illusion of hundreds of thousands of troops. To attack Calais, they even found an actor who looked exactly like Montgomery, and let him appear in North Africa and Egypt every day, making German spies believe that the Allied High Command didn't take the Western Front seriously. This series of tricks succeeded, deceived Hitler and his generals completely. They believed that the Allies were to win Calais, and Normandy was just a feint, so they kept their best troops firmly in place, waiting for the Allies. On the German side, who was in charge of the Western Front was Rommel. He keenly judged that the first 24 hours of the landing were crucial to the outcome, and the enemy must be driven into the sea on the beach. Unfortunately, he advocated deploying armored forces in the rear for deep defense. The two sides argued. Finally, Hitler intervened, deprived Rommel of command of the armored forces. This fatal decision, which made the German army lose, most gruesome. On June 6, the historic D-Day arrived. Due to the bad weather, Rommel thought the Allies couldn't land. He went home to celebrate his wife's birthday. The German command system was leaderless, and the soldiers relaxed their vigilance. In the early morning of that day, Eisenhower seized the brief window of improved weather. With a word, a huge fleet of more than 6,000 ships, with the cover of sea and air fire, launched a fierce attack on 5 beaches in Normandy. The U.S. landing on Utah Beach went extremely smoothly. The German second-rate troops were defeated, with minimal losses, but the nearby Omaha Beach became a hell on earth. Due to the poor effect of the previous bombs, the elite German 30th, with the help of the strong fort, fiercely fired. As soon as the U.S. soldiers, the landing craft were swept down, and the beach was dyed red. In a crisis, the U.S. destroyer ignored the danger of grounding, rushed to within a few hundred meters. They used their guns to bombard the German bunkers, which opened a bloody path for the infantry. On this day, the U.S. casualties on Omaha Beach reached 3,000, while the British and Canadian forces were in charge of Juno beaches. The landing process was bumpy, but with the support of special tanks and naval air fire, they successfully established beachhead. The next day, more than 150,000 Allied soldiers. Hitler was furious when he heard the news. He hurriedly dispatched armored divisions, but it was too late. With the Allies' absolute air supremacy, German reinforcements were blown to pieces on the way. By June 12th, the 5 landing sites were successfully connected, forming a stable beachhead of 80 kilometers wide. Subsequent troops and supplies were continuously, by the end of July, 1.5 million Allied soldiers set foot on French soil. The Normandy landing campaign was declared a victory. The death knell of Nazi Germany was completely sounded. This amphibious landing, largest amphibious landing battle, was not only a great military victory, but also completely changed the world. It announced the arrival of the Cold War era. The world dominated by the old empires was gone forever.